topic this week is what I call portable tech documents, and much of the motivation or analogy comes from portable document format created by Adobe, and that was really very important for solving a large number of problems that had come up with PostScript. PostScript one hands down as a sort of page description language, but it didn't work well in the publishing workflow. And PDF allowed a lot of problems to be solved, though, as Doug McKenna will tell us, it provided restrictions that prevented certain innovations that advanced users might want to do. So my idea is that, well, let's put it a different way. You can send somebody a Word document, and provided they got a copy of Word and it's the right copy of Word, they can open it. You can send somebody a PDF document, and as long as they've got Acrobat Reader or something similar, they can open it. And not only open it, but do the things you can expect to be able to do with it. Now, if you send somebody a TeX document, TeX source document, what they'd like to be able to do is they'd like to be able to typeset it, and they'd like to be able to edit it and typeset the edited version. And to do that, they have to have something installed. But Word and TeX are sort of not versioned in the same sorts of ways, and the expectations are very different. And so the whole thing becomes a bit different. And I'm not going to go much into the technical detail because they can come later, but I want to talk first of all about the benefits. And based on what I've come up with and what people have said before we started recording, first benefit is collaboration. And Overleaf are very successful based on collaboration. That is one of the big benefits of collaboration. And I include with that submission to publishers and integration with GitHub and stability. But the price of using Overleaf, apart from the financial price and the restriction to a web interface, is that you're confined to their version of TeX Live, just as if you use a Word document, you're confined to Microsoft's version of Word, if that makes sense. So there's a lack of sort of openness. So the first benefit I see is collaboration between authors and with publishers and with other systems such as GitHub. The second benefit I see is archiving. So if you want to reproduce the typesetting of a document 5 years in the future because you want to produce a second edition, it would be good if you could reliably reproduce the typesetting without having to build a 3 GB image that contains everything that you might possibly need, rather than what you actually need. And at this point, it's worth mentioning that a well-organized website downloads only the resources that the web browser needs. And the resources that are common are kept. There's a web framework called Elm, where you can build your application using thousands and thousands of functions in libraries, and only the functions that can possibly be called are included in the download. So you actually have very small builds because the system knows what can be used. So having a portable TeX document that is minimal is very helpful for archiving, because it means that you can create the image needed very quickly. Support is a special form of collaboration that is well worth mentioning in its own right, because the difficulty with TeX problems is sometimes they don't reproduce on different systems. And so having a portable TeX document where everything is self-contained, and at this point I'll go back to PDF. The thing about PDF is that it had, I'm going to look up now. It had a structured storage system. PDF provides a structured storage system for the storage of fonts and graphics and other multimedia objects and other resources. So it stores them and it knows how to find them. And in some sense, TeX Live provides that structured system, but it's not nearly so standardized and it's not so easy to embed everything into a single file. And then once you've got that file, it's quite likely to be large. So how do you send the whole file over? It's well known that a PDF file is bigger than the D file by a considerable margin. And the final benefit I see is in development. So that's my sort of motivation for portable TeX documents. And based on the conversation we've had, I think Doug has got something to say about development, and Dwight might have something to say about publishers, and anybody else who wants to talk, of course. So over to Dwight and Doug and anybody else on the benefits of having portable documents.
Well, regarding publishers, all I can really say is that our own publisher expressed, I wouldn't call it a complaint, but they certainly did say that they had difficulty accepting LaTeX source. And so, although for the published volumes, we ended up producing PDF after going through several rounds of professional typesetting provided by the publisher, but the LaTeX that I ended up supplying them was a highly processed form, so that it contained everything except what you would download if you processed the LaTeX using MikTeX, because it will go away and find what you need if it's current and compatible. Anyway, the point is that publishers do have a problem, simply because when people say, I use LaTeX, they really mean the TeX engine plus a bunch of LaTeX macros plus a selection from hundreds of available, if not thousands, class files. And that's a real difficulty for publishers.
So in my electronic book, which is a non-portable TeX document in a way, I mean, it's an application with a TeX interpreter in it, and then not just the source file for my book, but also it includes plain.tex and as the format. And then there's a macro library called opmac by Peter Olsak in Czechoslovakia, who gave me permission to include that. It's a very lightweight LaTeX. I don't use LaTeX in the book, and I didn't really need it because opmac had just the minimal amount of functionality I needed for this 160-page book. But my, for a LaTeX document, there's an enormous amount of infrastructure for, as Dwight said, for all the classes. And if you don't have those, your document isn't going to be looking like or doing the things you want it to do. So that's a lot of baggage to put into a portable document file, if you will, like a PDF file, because a PDF file is self-contained. You don't need the internet, for instance, to read a PDF file. And that's a good thing. And it's kind of unclear, if this idea of portable TeX document needs the internet or not, to me anyway. On the other hand, my problem with my app is, of course, it's very difficult to, it's on one platform only, and a lot of work to get it working on another platform, particularly for my subject matter, which requires a very high performance graphic system that is not necessarily available elsewhere. Those are some of my thoughts on that. It seems like there's somewhere in between the source code to a TeX document and the final output that needs to be talked about, maybe with respect to transferring files to publishers or getting, intermediate editing done. And, Interleaf kind of takes care of that for a lot of people. So I don't know, it's kind of the complexity of the tech ecosystem is a real problem here. My personal project is trying to find radical simplicity to it all, but I'm probably tilting at windmills, but I persist.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Dwight. Nelson.
I'd like to toss in a couple of experiences we've had here locally in Utah. One of my colleagues a number of years ago had written a popular book in mathematics that was relatively complex and probably 300 or 400 pages long, and delivered the TeX files to the publisher. The book was published and sold well, and a few years later, the publisher returned and said, "Please, author, would you generate a new edition?" And he said, "Fine, I'm happy to do that. Will you give me the final files that you further edited and tweaked so I can start with those to prepare the new edition?" And he was told, "We no longer have them." The solution that turned out the only way to deal with this was to scan in the book, do OCR on it, and then have a competent technical typist go through it, correct all of the OCR errors, and have the TeX mark. Fortunately, we had a superb guy who did this, but that normally wouldn't be available. So that's an issue that authors really need to think about, that if the publisher has access to your text and modifies it in any way, it would be good to have part of the author-publisher agreement that you get back the final edited files in case a new edition is called for. In the case of a book that I wrote solely, I delivered a complete PDF where I own all of the files, and the only thing the publisher added was a cover. Second book that I co-authored, that was done in XML, delivered to the publisher, put into a word processor, tweaked, and we never saw the updated files. And so if a new edition of that book were ever called for, we would pretty much have to start from scratch. So I think this is an issue that people need to think of who are involved in publishing, as Dwight is, that if you contemplate future editions, you really have to have some understanding with the publisher that you have control over the files.
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you very much.